just want to make sure that I'm familiar.
All right, let's continue our discussion. I know we kind of started this as like psychopharmacology, and you guys are thinking drugs, that's awesome. I'm going to learn about drugs and what they do to me, and we did a little bit. We'll revisit drug addiction later in the semester, so you'll need to call back to this at that point, right? So that's going to be great. We have since sort of transitioned into speaking about specific neurotransmitters, because what did we say about all drugs? They affect some function of a neurotransmitter, right? They mimic a neurotransmitter, they enhance its effects, they inhibit its effects, they do something with the effect of a neurotransmitter, so we should be somewhat familiar with neurotransmitters, right? You got a whole big group of these guys called monoamines, okay? They include guys like dopamine. How many of you have heard of that one? That's an important one. How many of you do things to increase your dopamine levels? All right, a couple of you understand that. Adriana, what's something you do that's legal you can tell us to increase your dopamine levels? Because I want to give you that like non-incriminating out. You run a lot. That will definitely increase your dopamine levels. There's actually not that you're in this category, so I want to be clear of that.
Okay.
There's a whole group of folks who actually use running and marathons and so forth as a way to stop using drugs, right? They use that as a recovery process, and they'll basically what they're doing is they're replacing cocaine with running, because you do still, you know, one of those is much healthier for you than the other, just but again, still in moderation. Actually, in graduate school, we had this, one of my biochem professors, cell biology actually, he ran every day at lunch. And he ran so much, I'm thoroughly convinced he did not have any hip joints. And so when he would run, it was like, no, really, Zane, I'm not lying. That's how he would run, right like that. And because that's all he could do, and you could just see his ankles and knees were just like swollen, knobby messes, but he still went out there every day at lunch to run. Just like, I don't know, it's awful. So watch out for that. Don't run too much. Celine, I don't know if that could happen to you. Don't run too much. You never run, so don't worry about it. That's great. All right, so dopamine, L-Dopa, we talked about that a little bit. You guys might think about L-Dopa when you're thinking about treating Parkinson's disease. We'll talk about the whole relationship between Parkinson's disease, dopamine, and then the other side of that coin is going to be schizophrenia. We'll talk about those later in this semester, but you kind of need to have an idea here. Norepinephrine and epinephrine are also part of the monoamine category. Sometimes you might hear these referred to as adrenaline or noradrenaline. Okay. The reason they call them adrenaline, so the word renal, that's referring to your kidney. So most of you have a couple kidneys. I'm going to draw one of those. I love this. I had this anatomy book once, and it described the kidney as, and this, I love circular definitions, as the kidney bean shaped organ, you know, the paired kidney bean shaped organ. And I thought, why are they called kidney beans? Because they're shaped like the kidneys. The kidneys are not shaped like kidney beans, right? It's the other way around. And I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. On top of your kidney, or the kidney bean, whatever, is a little, I call it the elf hat. All right, that's the adrenal gland. That's where these guys are coming from. Okay, that's why I call it adrenaline or noradrenaline. Not a big deal. How many of you have ever seen a warning label on your medication, don't take this if you are on an MAOI? Right? Anybody heard of MAOIs? Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. MAOIs are sometimes given to folks to treat a variety of sort of neurological issues, including depression, right? What it does is it inhibits, that's the I, something called monoamine oxidase, right? Which goes through and it kind of takes monoamines and chops off an oxidase, right? Okay, so it's going to, an oxide group, so it's going to get rid of that. So it's an ACE, right? ACEs are choppers. They break things up, they're enzymes. So MAOIs are going to help destroy your monoamine oxidase, or monoamine oxidase is going to destroy your monoamines, including dopamine. If you inhibit that, it gives you more dopamine. So an MAOI, would you consider that a dopamine agonist or antagonist. If it's going to increase dopamine levels, it's going to be an agonist, right? The problem is there are a lot of sort of dietary constraints with MAOIs, right? So no wine or cheese, Casey. I don't know if those are like two of your favorite food groups or not. You don't like wine or cheese. Grape and dairy-free diet, that's the way to go. But you can't eat those things. And then other medications cause interference. There are some major pathways when it comes to dopamine that we need to think about. There's the nigrostriatal pathway. This is going to be involved in Parkinson's disease, right? Your other two pathways are going to be involved, the mesolimbic and the mesocortical. That's going to be involved with like learning and memory, reward systems, addiction pathways, things like that. We'll kind of tease those apart when we get there. No worries on that. Here's an example of this is a rat brain, showing you some of the major dopaminergic pathways. Again, what I want you to take away from this is if we try, let's say you have low dopamine in that substantia nigra to nucleus, or to caudate nucleus putamen striatum pathway. The problem is if I give you something that increases dopamine, Morgan, it's going to increase it here, but it also increases dopamine here, right? And when I start increasing dopamine out here in your frontal cortex, that can induce schizophrenic-like symptoms. Okay, so we kind of got to walk that line. Right? Don't worry too much about this. Here's monoamine oxidase. We just talked about that. Just showing you how MAOI or MAO converts dopamine into an inactive substance. Again, if we inhibit that, we're going to increase dopamine function. Norepinephrine. This guy's really important, in particular in the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Remember, we said sympathetic sort of gets you all riled up, right? Okay. How many of you have ever had an adrenaline rush and you just like, well, I'm going to go to sleep now? It doesn't work that way, right? What does an adrenaline rush do for you, right? That's why it's important to think about adrenaline and noradrenaline, right, as the other name for epinephrine or norepinephrine, right? You get an adrenaline rush, it's going to activate that autonomic nervous system, right? So that guy's keyed up, your heart rate's up, your blood pressure's up, your blood's going to certain places involved in like running and fighting and things, not going to that like, I just ate a cheeseburger and I need to get that out of my body stuff, right? Your digestion is going to be going on in a different place. Again, here's your adrenergic system. A couple major areas where it starts. Obviously, you think about going to some movement areas. It's going to involve your hippocampus, your cortex. It's going to get you up and moving. Interestingly, some stuff goes out to your amygdala. That's related to fear. All right, who loves serotonin? Everyone does. We're going to abbreviate that 5-HT, right? That'll save you a little bit of ink or pencil lead there, just for your benefit. This guy's pretty, does a lot of stuff too. It's pretty important. You've got mood, controls eating, sleep, arousal, regulation of pain. We'll talk about each of these sort of systems as we go. You'll think about how serotonin plugs in there. Most folks know somebody who's on an SSRI, right? Especially if any of you actually work, work in the, I guess, a psychology-related field, right? If any of you work, trying to think of some places where they might work, Casey. Residential facilities, a hospital, wherever, right? Places. If you work places, you probably know someone who's on an SSRI. They're fairly commonly prescribed, right? That is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So remember that reuptake process? We said that was one way that we could end the effects of a neurotransmitter, right? Cindy, we said you're going to release the neurotransmitter, then you're just going to pull it right back, right? So you don't have it out there forever doing its business. The problem is folks who are maybe a little angry, maybe folks who are depressed, they don't have enough serotonin out there at the synapse. So if we block that reuptake process, we can have the serotonin out there longer. It'll have a longer lasting effect. It'll do more. And then those people will calm down a little bit. The other thing is they tend to sleep a bit. So if you know someone who's on an SSRI or you've been on one yourself, one of the main side effects is sleepiness. So folks will get a little drowsy if you're on that. No worries there. Again, here are your serotonergic pathways. They again sort of just go everywhere. This is why systemically increasing serotonin levels causes effects in many places, and we'll talk about that as we go. I don't expect you to know all that right now. Histamine, don't worry too much about histamine. We will talk about this when we talk about sleep, right? How many of you have taken Benadryl and then taken a nap? We talked about this, right? Except Adriana's friend. She thought it was just because she was Canadian that it got her hyped up, but that's not it. Although I kind of had this brief thought about like closed breeding populations and whether or not she was like, right? That's where I was thinking on this, right? Like maybe there's some like genetic component to this. It's not her fault. I don't think it's Canada's fault either. Justin Trudeau is blameless in this. So just to be clear. Here is, the histaminergic pathway. Again, it's going to get into that cortex, right? That's what's going to keep you up and doing things. So if you've got histamine going there, way to go. Here's like a whole list of drugs that affect monoamines. Some of these you've heard of. There should be an L, by the way. Fix that. Right? Cocaine, for example, actually blocks dopamine reuptake. So once you release dopamine, it just stays out there for a while, right? So that's something. Not a big deal. Here's another whole list. I'm not expecting you to memorize all of those. We'll talk about the important ones as we go, okay? It's just sort of an overview right now. What about neuromodulators, right? Other things that can act like neurotransmitters or affect ion channel or receptor mechanics. There are some peptides. Basically, what is a peptide? It is it's kind of a short link, right? Just a few amino acids. We're not really talking about a long chain here of those, right? Your endogenous opioids. These are the opioids you create inside your body, right? Stump your toe, you're going to release some opioids. It's going to help mediate some pain. Those guys are peptides. And then when it comes to lipids, there are also many lipids that can work. One of the best known examples are the endocannabinoids. Again, endo means created inside your body, so these are the cannabinoids that you naturally create yourself inside your body without any sort of external influence. So that happens as well. So there you go. Questions about that? Comments, concerns? Don't go home and I always worry about this, right? Like, who's going to go home and try to like make extra endocannabinoids, like, just to see if they can get like a free high? It doesn't work that way. Just this is my don't try this at home disclaimer, right? Because you should always put that at the bottom. Don't try that at home. And there you go. There's some drugs that work as like peptides or lipids. Your opiates, naloxone, for examples, on there. Some cannabinoid agonists and so forth. Questions about that before we move forward?